All right. Okay, so now we move on to the tips and tricks of the business environment, okay, which is actually the first chapter in our training, PMP training material, and the second chapter here in this coaching session. All right. Now, remember, I mentioned earlier in the previous general tips and tricks, the code of ethics. Now, PMI really wants you to, the code of ethics is actually just a few pages document. I think less than 10 pages. It's good to read it. If you were part of our PMP training, you will find it in our drive in the folder called PMI official documentation. Okay, PMI code of ethics or emphasizes on being honest, being respectful, being fair. For example, being fair when awarding the contracts, for example, and being responsible. So leading the project responsibly. So I really definitely advise you to go ahead and read the code of ethics. We mentioned earlier the key skills from the talent triangle. We mentioned the business acumen, the ways of working, and the power skills. We mentioned them in that part about the PMI mindset. Remember, now we are in the business environment. Okay, tips and tricks. Remember that the project must always deliver business value, whether it's adaptive project or predictive project. Okay, it always must focus on creating and delivering value. And creating and delivering value is not just in Agile, even in predictive project management. Okay. A very important part of the business environment tips and tricks is the compliance. Now, PMI emphasizes a lot on compliance, whether it's compliance with the law, with the regulations, obligations, guidelines, rules, processes, etc. So compliance is actually a mindset, okay? And for implementing regulations, if we are implementing any regulations in the project, you need to consider seeking guidance. So seek guidance from the sponsor or refer back to the governance. But when implementing regulations, you need to seek guidance to be sure that actually you're doing it right and you're doing it the right way, and actually you're fulfilling or abiding the law. So really keep this in mind. So in the exam, if there are any questions about implementing regulations, you might consider referring to the subject matter experts. Okay. When we say that the project must deliver value, actually the value can be any financial gain, can be obtaining new customers, okay, or realizing or achieving social benefits, okay, achieving social benefits, being the first to market, actually making some improvements to the process or the quality, or abiding some regulations. Okay, these are what can be business value. The project management plan, as we saw in the training, it's usually a term used in Waterfall. Okay, it can be sometimes used in hybrid project management, but mainly we use it in Waterfall project management. It's a document that explains how the project will be managed. Okay, so please keep this in mind. And also how the project will be managed. This is also explained in all the sub plans or all the plans about the other knowledge areas, such as the scope management plan, the risk management plan, the cost management plan, the resource management plan, the schedule management plan, the quality management plan, the procurement management plan, etc., etc. Okay, all right. So all the project management plan and all the subsidiary plans, they explain how the project and the sub plans are going to be managed. It is effective. The project management plan is effective when it guides the project to deliver within the approved or the agreed scope, budget, and schedule plans or baselines. And also it is effective if it helps to maintain quality, risks, and changes, and also if it leads to stakeholder satisfaction. Now, we've added this, of course, as our tips and tricks version 2, because, how would you know if your project plan is effective or if your project management plan is effective? And that is done in case it achieves those, or it helps to achieve what has just been mentioned. Okay. The project manager is the one responsible for choosing the project management methodology or approach for the project. Of course, you need to consider different and various um, uh, various let's say elements or constraints when picking the approach. Okay, so within the scope, yeah, all right. These are the baselines. Let me put here baselines actually, which are scope, budget, and schedule. Okay, all right. Okay, and the baselines usually what does baseline mean? Baseline, these are approved plans and they are used for measuring performance. Please remember this, that the baselines are used to monitor to compare the performance against them. Okay, all right. Um, the project, so the definition of a project. So project is temporary, is unique, while operations are ongoing and repetitive. The project charter, it authorizes the existence of the project. Okay, it's usually drafted by the sponsor, but sometimes the sponsor doesn't know how to draft it, so the project manager will help with that. But you, as a project manager, you need to make sure that the project contains a project charter, and also the project charter, it officially assigns the project manager to the project. So the project charter officially assigns the project manager to the project. If the project is not aligned with the company's strategy anymore, in case, for example, in one of the questions, you understand that the project is not aligned to the company's strategy anymore, then you need to review the project charter. Okay. We mentioned that earlier. We said that projects must be aligned with the company's strategy. If that is not the case anymore, then you go back to the project charter and you review it. Okay, or ask the sponsor, review it, of course, with the sponsor. Okay, not just by yourself. The project management office is the party that regulates the project management in the company, and it can be a supportive PMO with a low control, a controlling PMO with a moderate control, and a directive PMO with a high control. And of course, in our training, you will find all the details about what does a supportive PMO do, what does a controlling PMO do, and what does a directive PMO do. But you need to make sure that you understand the different level of control between these three types of PMO. The directive one assigns the project managers and leads the projects directly. However, the supportive one provides lessons learned, templates, documentation, training, etc. And the controlling one is more about controlling the documentation, compliance, etc. Also, when you're taking the PMP exam, you need to understand you need to check if the question indicates which type of organization or in which type of organization is the project being performed, and you will understand that actually from some keywords. For example, if the question says you were managing a project and suddenly the resources were pulled out of your project. If the resources were pulled out of your project and suddenly or just they left, that means you don't have authority and power over those resources. That means you're more in a weak matrix or in a functional organization, because in a functional or weak matrix organization, actually is the functional manager that decides about the project, the budget, the resources, etc. And you're more of just a part-time project manager. Okay, you're more of just a person who is applying the project management steps and processes, and not really the one in control. However, in a projectized or in a strong matrix organization, actually you're in power and you're the one leading and deciding about the project. Now, acting or actually answering the certain questions in the PMP exam will depend on your understanding. Will depend on your understanding of the organization type. Okay, and you will be able to understand the organization type by two ways. Either it indicates in the question directly in what kind of organization are you working, or actually there will be some keywords that indicate that, such as the functional manager assigned some resources to you, or the functional manager gave the okay, or some resources were pulled out of your project by the functional manager. So here, if it mentions something about the functional manager, then in the text, not in the answers, in the text, then you definitely are in a functional or a weak matrix organization. Or sometimes you need to check the answers, and from there, when you know the right answer, then you will understand that you're actually in either in a functional weak matrix or in a strong matrix projectized organization. But there is a number of questions that or in which you need to pay attention to, in which type of organization are you managing the project. But in most of the questions, in the exam, so for example, if we're talking about 180 questions in the exam, let's say it's almost 170 or 175 questions in the exam, you're managing the project in a projectized or in a strong matrix organization. So most of the exam scenarios are based on that type of organization, okay? All right. In the training, we've talked about the organizational process sets, which are the company's internal processes, okay, including the lessons learned database, knowledge base, guidelines, okay. So now regarding the lessons learned, lessons learned usually they come or they are documented right after we solve an issue, okay. So if we solve an issue, definitely the next thing we need to do is to document lessons learned. And once we document lessons learned, we need to add them to the OPA database, to the Organization Process Assets database. So please remember this. Once we solve an issue, right after solving the issue, we need to update the lessons learned. And from that lessons learned, we can also come up with a risk, or we can, identify a risk. So such issues wouldn't happen in the future, because what can prevent an issue is identifying it while it is still a risk. Remember this, okay? EEF, enterprise environmental factors. These are the conditions surrounding the company and its environment, and its environment, actually, not its environment, and its environment, such as the laws, the practices in the industry, the culture of the organization, the culture, etc. Okay, those are EFs. Okay. We've talked in the training about the iron and triangle constraints, and they are the same as baseline, scope, cost, and schedule. So those are the constraints in a typical waterfall project. Project success criteria, they must be defined at the start of the project. Okay, how can we know that the project will be a success? So from the beginning of the project, we need to define what will be this project success criteria. Okay, such, for example, we say the project is considered successful if it respects if it meets the constraints, if it aligns, if it achieves customer satisfaction, etc. All right. Remember that always the product life cycle is longer, bigger than the project life cycle. Project life cycle is measured usually in months, product life cycle in years. A program is a group of related projects, and a portfolio is a group of programs, is a group of unrelated programs and projects. The business case is what we call the feasibility study or the study phase. It takes place before the project start. It justifies the existence of the project once it is approved, and the approval of the business case can happen through the murder board or a decision matrix. Okay, mainly these two. The project manager is not necessarily involved in the project study phase, but must consult the business case if, for example, at the start of the project, the stakeholders are not aligned on the objectives and the deliverables. So you go back and you consult the business case to help explain what's actually the purpose of the project. Or you go back also to the project charter. Projects should never harm the company. So should never undertake projects to harm the company. So remember this, okay? Also, we should never take projects that could harm society, for example, all right? The benefits management plan defines the process for creating, maximizing, and sustaining the benefits realized within the project. So that's what a benefits management plan, okay? It can also be referred to throughout the project life cycle whenever there are doubts whether the project is making actually the expected benefits or not. Okay, so that's the purpose of the benefits management plan. Okay. Assumption log is usually used for tracking the validity of the assumptions and also of the constraints. Okay, it's called an assumption log. The configuration management plan, it is used for tracking the updates and the versions of the different documentation. The projects must sustain the earth, the people, and the profit. This is called the 3 Ps. Okay. SWOT. SWOT, of course, is an abbreviation. The S and the W is abbreviation for strengths and weaknesses. These are internal factors that you need to consider when before. So consider before choosing. Now consider when deciding on a solution, for example. Okay. So you need to consider the internal factors. Do you have the strengths or do you have any weaknesses when deciding on a solution? And of course, the OT is for opportunities and threats. These are positive and negative risks. We'll come back to that later. Not later, actually, in the next session when we talk about the risks. Okay. When you are unsure about whether the company has got the necessary competencies to undertake a new project, then you need here to conduct a SWOT analysis, and mainly if the company is considering a project about implementing a new technology that does not exist in the company. Okay, that in that scenario, SWOT is a good technique to use. In case of a transition project, for example, from predictive to adaptive, you need to ask to pick the answers, or you need to assess the company's culture or the readiness for a change. Okay, because sometimes there are questions in the exam that stipulates resistance from the various stakeholders for this transition. So here, before transitioning, make sure that you assess the company's culture or the change acceptance. The term post-mortem means studying the reasons that could lead to project failure, imagining all the possible scenarios that could lead to the project failure. Okay. You need to always collect approvals on deliverables before closing the project. Okay, so we don't close the project before getting approvals from the stakeholders, from the customer on the completed deliverables. Okay, that's really a must do before closing the project. We cannot enforce closing the project. We mentioned that earlier. Also, other actions that take place during closing the project: documenting the lessons learned, paying the bills, closing the contracts, disbanding the team, which means releasing the team, and also moving to operations, because in a lot of projects, once it is closed, then we'll move to the operations. Okay. So these are we have listed here some actions, because we don't know what kind of questions you will have in the exam, but at least in these tips and tricks, we're listing for you what needs to be done before closing the project, because a lot of questions in the exam are about how to effectively close a project. Okay. All right. Good. We've just finished with the tips and tricks for the business environment. Okay. Let's put them in a separate video, and let's do one more tips and tricks. And these ones will be really short.